Look, I'm a scientist. I have a laboratory. I study brain activity and physiology. And I was invited to witness this woman, Pacita, and her operations. What I saw there initially contradicted every concept and piece of knowledge I had about reality.
What began as the testimony of a scientist confronted with something he could not explain would eventually become one of the most enduring mysteries in modern Mexican history. For years, Jacobo Grinberg sought to prove that human consciousness could transcend the boundaries of space and time. His research pointed toward a reality far stranger than conventional science was willing to accept. Then, just as he was preparing to carry out the most ambitious experiment of his career, he vanished without a trace.
Well, the experiment, what it tried to do was see if there were direct brain-to-brain interactions.
We call this transferred potential or transfer potential. And what it indicates is that one brain, in some way, established direct contact with the other brain, and what happened to the first brain had repercussions in the second brain.
This project was like the culmination. The next step was to do it at a distance. It was called transferred potential because it was believed to transfer. But then we said, no, it doesn't transfer, it happens at the same time. This is non-local. The only way to prove it was to do it at a distance with India. We already had the permission, the doctor, the equipment, everything, and Jacobo disappeared.
Now, what consequences? What is they're vast.
But before delving into his experiments, it is worth going back to the origin, to the root of his vision. Because Grinberg was not a conventional scientist. He was someone who tried to look beyond what the senses allow us to perceive, beyond visible reality. Jacobo Grinberg was born in Mexico in 1946. In the academic world, he was recognized for his rigor, for his publications, and for his work in neurophysiology. But outside the laboratories, his figure began to become difficult to fit into a single category. For some, he was a bridge between two worlds, a scientist among shamans, and a shaman among scientists. For years, his research led him to venture into territories where traditional science began to brush against its own limits: perception, consciousness, and the very nature of reality. In 1994, at the height of his career, he mysteriously disappeared. Numerous hypotheses about his whereabouts circulate online, and an aura of mystery surrounds both his life and his disappearance. The most substantiated theories include a crime of passion and possible kidnapping by undercover CIA operatives. In 2020, filmmaker Ida Cuellar, after 7 years of research, released a documentary exploring his disappearance. It features declassified CIA documents on telepathy experiments, in which Dr. Jacobo Grinberg's name appears. However, the most fascinating aspect of Grinberg is not his disappearance, but his theories on consciousness and reality.
Dr. Grinberg, you have developed the syntergic theory, which is based on the shamanic conception of existence. Can you tell us a bit about that theory?
The syntergic theory states that there is a basic organization of space. This basic organization would be like a matrix, a grid, a lattice-like structure whose fundamental state is total coherence and symmetry.
Following the scientific method, Grinberg sought to explain paranormal phenomena through the syntergic theory, which proposed that there are no separate objects, but rather an informational field of extraordinary complexity with which our brain interacts. Grinberg mentioned that this field is the same as what some physicists call the pre-spatial field. And when the brain interacts with the field, it generates the space-time perception we know, with objects having form and figure.
I'm going to tell you where I stand in terms of my understanding of the relationship between consciousness and the brain. And maybe with that I can answer your question. Well, first of all, it's very clear now that we interact with an informational matrix, with an informational field, which contains all the information in each of its portions. It's an informational matrix of a holographic type, but at that level there is no quality of experience. There are no objects separated from one another, from the others, but rather it is an informational field of extraordinary complexity.
Grinberg envisioned a subtle and primordial structure that contains all information and potentials of reality, which he called the latis. He considered this lattice as the essence of reality, present at all levels of manifestation. This lattice or fundamental matrix could be seen as the Brahman of Hinduism, the all or great mind of Hermes Trismegistus, the omnipotent, omnipresent, infinite and eternal God of Christianity, or the Tao of Taoism. The Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. Nameless, it is the beginning of the universe. Named, it is the mother of all things. From the non-being, we understand its essence. From being, we only see its appearance.
Well, the experiment, what it tried to do was see if there were direct brain-to-brain interactions. So what we did was build a chamber, soundproofed. This is a chamber that dampens sound coming in from the outside, a chamber that was also visually opaque. We worked in total darkness and electromagnetically shielded in a way that prevents electromagnetic waves from entering. In this chamber, we invited a series of couples to sit comfortably, close their eyes, not talk, not touch. And in this situation of zero stimulation, the only thing that existed was the presence of one another. They felt each other without needing to use language. At that point, one of the two was invited to go into another chamber that we had also built beforehand with the same characteristics. In this situation, we invited them to stay in communication, meaning to feel, to keep feeling each other's presence. The one who stayed in the original chamber was stimulated. They were shown a series of flashes, and we recorded their activity triggered by the flashes, what we call an evoked potential. And simultaneously, we were recording the brain activity of the other person who wasn't stimulated, who didn't know their partner was being stimulated. And what we observed is that when an evoked potential appeared in the stimulated person, in the other person, a potential also appeared that was synchronous with the appearance of the stimulus, with the presentation of the stimulus. We call this a transferred potential or transfer potential. And what it indicates is that one brain somehow established direct contact with the other brain. And what happened to the first brain had an impact on the second brain. Now, what consequences? What is they're vast, right? Because first of all, it's telling us that the limit of brain activity isn't the skull, not even the brain structure itself, but that there's a level of brain activity that, so to speak, transcends the structure itself. Now, this indicates that each of us is interacting all the time without knowing it, without necessarily being aware of it. Interactions exist between us so that just as there is a network of interneuronal interactions, we can assume the existence of a network of interbrain interactions. And this would allow us to assume the possibility of the existence of an organism arising from these interbrain interactions. An organism, what does an organism mean? A level of activity that transcends us as individuals, of which we are a part, and most likely one that is affecting us and we are affecting.
For Grinberg, this suggested that two minds could remain connected even after being physically separated. This phenomenon is deeply related to quantum entanglement, a strange behavior observed in the subatomic world. Two particles appear to share information instantaneously regardless of the distance separating them, seemingly defying some of the most fundamental principles of physics, including the limit imposed by the speed of light. Michael Talbot, the author of the book The Holographic Universe, explained it like this.
It's been discovered that if you take two subatomic particles like electrons, and in certain instances, when you do something to one, it will always affect the other, no matter how far apart they are. It's kind of like stories that you've heard of identical twins where when one is hurt, the other feels the pain. And the problem is that we can find no process known to physics that explains how these could be sending a signal back and forth. In fact,
because it would have to be faster than the speed of light.
Instantaneous. It would have to be an instantaneous signal, and Einstein's theory of relativity said you can't have instantaneous signals because it would mean that you could violate the time barrier and conceivably call your grandfather and tell him not to marry your grandmother. And most physicists say, well, this would be just too troubling to incorporate into a rational picture of reality. Is that we've always tried to understand, for example, psychic phenomena, like how could I get information out of your head in my head, as some sort of signal going back and forth. But if we're organized, if we live in a universe that's organized holographically, you no longer have to tackle it that way. It could be that I have the entire universe and every neuron, every cell, every atom, every electron in my head, and you do also. So when we can access that, we can access information that seems to be beyond our normal sensory reach.
But Jacobo wanted to go much further. The next phase of his research sought to answer an even bolder question. Would that connection continue to exist if the individuals were separated by thousands of kilometers? The experiment was already being prepared. The idea was to repeat the same protocol with two previously connected participants, but this time located at opposite ends of the planet, one in Mexico and the other in India. If the results were replicated, the implications would be extraordinary. However, the experiment was never carried out. Just as Grinberg was preparing to travel to India and finalize the details of the investigation, he disappeared without a trace. He never reached his destination, and he was never seen again. Later, we will explore the circumstances surrounding his disappearance and the various theories that attempt to explain it. But to understand why the figure of Jacobo Grinberg continues to fascinate people decades later, we must go back a few years.
Salvador and I witnessed an extraordinary event, and I was invited to meet this woman, Pacita, and observe her operations. And what I saw there initially contradicted every concept and all the knowledge I had about reality.
Evidently, the works of Jacobo Grinberg, the most important perhaps, are dedicated to studying shamans, Mexican shamans. What are the experiences of shamans that have impressed you the most?
What has most astonished me of all the study that I have done of the shamans of Mexico is that these extraordinary characters function or seem to function in a reality that has no intermediate steps, where there is no process. For example, Pacita is one of the most astonishing cases that I was able to witness. I worked with her for several months. Pacita, a patient would come to see her, for example, someone who had a lung problem, and then if she decided, in some way she could directly perceive what was happening to the patient and what the patient required to improve. If the patient needed, she would do an operation where she extracted the diseased lungs and grafted healthy lungs. Now, this is inconceivable. Come on, current surgery is already starting to do this type of operations, but the way in which Pacita did these operations was with practically empty hands. The only instrument she used was a hunting knife, very crude, very large, and besides, the operations were performed in minutes. It was almost instantaneous, right? What was done. And when asking Pacita, what happened, how is it that she did this portent, she said that the process simply occurred like that. Not only lung operations, but of heart, of brain, of, well, truly extraordinary things. Always had this characteristic in where it would seem that Pacita was located as a sentient being, as a sensitive being, in a level of reality where what she desired occurred. There was no apparent mechanism, right? between her desire and the realization of the desire. And her desire, if her desire was to materialize an object, the object appeared magically out of nowhere, or if her desire was to make it disappear, also it occurred. This was the most astonishing.
In the latest edition of his syntergic theory, Grinberg provides a detailed explanation of Pacita's miracles. According to him, Pacita was able to generate a neuronal field in complete coherence with the latis, the informational structure underlying our perception of reality. Grinberg stated that our perception of reality is a sequence of images that are created and disappear every 50 milliseconds, giving us the illusion of continuity. Under normal circumstances, these perceptions are fleeting, but Grinberg speculated that if someone could extend the duration of one of these perceptions, they could anchor it in the lattice, thus materializing objects or even organs. This could explain how Pacita performed her extraordinary interventions, manipulating the lattice to alter reality in a tangible way. For Grinberg, reality is not fixed, but a continuous process of creation and destruction of perceptions. By mastering this process, as Pacita seemingly did, it would be possible to materialize what normally exists only in our internal perception. Attention plays a key role in this process, but I would also like to add faith as another fundamental component in any act of manifestation. As Jesus said, "If you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it shall move, and nothing shall be impossible for you." Matthew 17:20. On December 8, 1994, Jacobo Grinberg disappeared without a trace, along with his wife, Teresa. What followed became one of the most unsettling mysteries in Mexico. Grinberg was about to travel to India to continue his pioneering research on consciousness and the possible distant connections between minds. He never made it. Almost immediately, his disappearance dominated media coverage across the country. When the official investigation began, the case was assigned to an experienced detective, Padilla, who started reconstructing the scientist's final movements. But the further he progressed, the stranger everything became. Some witnesses claimed they had seen Grinberg and Teresa landing in a small aircraft in Colorado, United States, accompanied by two men allegedly linked to the CIA. And then something even more disturbing happened. Evidence collected by Padilla began to disappear. Files went missing. Documents vanished from the case. As if an invisible hand were slowly closing the investigation, the official version eventually leaned toward a crime of passion. Public interest faded. Padilla was discredited, removed from the case, and eventually disappeared from the public eye. Years later, he broke his silence in the documentary The Secret of Dr. Grinberg. What he revealed was unsettling. He claimed to have discovered that Grinberg was making frequent covert trips to Boulder, Colorado, which did not match his usual academic or personal routine. Padilla became convinced that these movements were linked to covert operations, and that the CIA might have been involved. And this is not as far-fetched as it may sound. The CIA has spent decades exploring the limits of the human mind. Projects like MK-Ultra investigated mind control through drugs and extreme psychological manipulation. Later came Stargate, a secret program focused on remote viewing and extrasensory perception for intelligence purposes. And there is another striking detail. In 2017, the CIA declassified documents in which Grinberg's syntergic theory is mentioned. In other words, his work was known in certain official circles. But the mystery does not end there. Grinberg had a close but turbulent relationship with the controversial author and shaman Carlos Castaneda. What began as mutual admiration eventually turned into a deep rupture. Grinberg strongly criticized what he saw as the manipulation of shamanic knowledge as a tool of power. According to several accounts, Castaneda once told him he wanted his brain, literally, in order to study it. Grinberg responded by laughing and mocking his lack of scientific rigor. The tension reached its peak in the months before his disappearance. Grinberg became furious after Castaneda broke a confidentiality pact during an interview in Spain, revealing sensitive information about his work. In response, Grinberg reportedly considered publicly revealing an even more serious accusation: that Castaneda had confessed, while in a trance state, to killing a shaman in order to experience what it felt like. In the end, Grinberg decided not to publish it, fearing possible retaliation. For some researchers, these conflicts point to a possible war of sorcerers, in which Grinberg may have represented a threat within that world of power and influence. And then there is Teresa, Grinberg's second wife, who disappeared alongside him. Grinberg reportedly confessed to his family that he was afraid of her, and at times even slept in his truck to avoid returning home. After the case, investigators found a disturbing detail. Teresa had allegedly tried to get close to Castaneda's inner circle. She also maintained contacts with individuals linked to military environments near the border region. Was it a crime of passion, as the official version suggested, or perhaps a connection point leading to his handover to a foreign agency? But there is still another theory, one that borders on science fiction and enters the realm of myth. Grinberg spent years studying shamans such as Pacita, who he claimed performed psychic surgeries with bare hands, materializing organs out of nothing. From this, Jacobo developed a revolutionary idea. Reality is a hologram, an information matrix he called the latis. He believed that if human consciousness reached a sufficiently high level, it could alter reality at will. For this reason, many believe that Jacobo Grinberg was neither murdered nor kidnapped. They believe he succeeded. They believe he elevated his consciousness to such a degree that he broke the physical illusion of our world, leaving his body behind to merge forever with the structure of the universe. Today, more than 30 years later, his disappearance remains a mystery, and his legacy is more alive than ever. Grinberg was a bridge between science and consciousness, a pioneer who emerged to question and transform our understanding of reality. He believed that each of us has the ability to transcend what he called the algorithm of the individual self, and merge with the self, a state in which personal identity dissolves into something far greater and more transcendent. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching until the end. See you soon.